The next slice could be their death sentence. That chilling thought hit me like a lightning bolt, and my heart seemed to stop. I, Emma, at 68 years old, was there, in the grand ballroom of Charleston, South Carolina, on the day of my only son, Michael's wedding to the beautiful Sarah. The hall was filled with laughter, music, and the soft light emanating from the chandeliers. But for me, everything had become a distant blur. I should have been at the peak of happiness. After all, I had spent months helping to plan every detail, from the flower arrangements to the menu. The cake, a three-tiered masterpiece covered in white frosting and golden details, was the center of attention, a symbol of the sweetness we hoped for their future. Michael and Sarah, with smiles radiating pure love, had just cut the first slice, and applause and camera flashes filled the air. I, overflowing with pride, watched them closely. It was at that moment, as a waiter prepared to serve the next portion, that something in the freshly cut slice caught my eye. A tiny, almost imperceptible glint embedded in the frosting. It wasn't a decorative sprinkle, nor a sugar crystal. It was something metallic, cold, reflecting the light in a strange, almost sinister way. My smile froze. A chilling sensation ran down my spine, a dark premonition that suffocated all the joy of the moment. If you've ever felt a shiver down your spine warning you of imminent danger, hit like and subscribe to the channel to follow this breathtaking story. I've always been a woman of details. My upbringing on a farm in rural Kansas taught me to observe, to notice what others missed, a skill essential for survival. After my husband passed away so young, I dedicated myself entirely to Michael. I worked as a librarian for over 30 years, and that job only enhanced my ability to see beyond the obvious. Now, my maternal instinct, sharpened by decades of care and protection, screamed at maximum alert. I needed to act, but how? The hall was packed, and any false move could not only ruin my son's day, but much worse, confirm my deepest fears. I watched the waiter, a young man with a relaxed smile, as he prepared to take the slice to the newlyweds' table. Michael and Sarah were laughing, oblivious to the approaching danger. I felt panic rise in my throat, but forced myself to remain calm. I remembered a time when Michael was a child, and I saved him from a household accident because I noticed a small exposed wire. Small details can have big consequences, I thought. I needed a plan, quick and discreet. My gaze swept the room, searching for an exit, a distraction, anything that could give me a few seconds to intercept that slice of cake. The music seemed louder, the voices more distant. Time for me had slowed to an agonizing crawl. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I acted. With a forced smile, I approached the cake table, pretending to admire the decoration. "Oh, what a wonderful cake! Michael and Sarah made an excellent choice," I said to the waiter, my voice sounding more controlled than I actually felt. "Excuse me, dear, but I'd love to take a closer picture. Could you please hold the slice for a moment? I want to capture all the details before it's served." The waiter, flattered by the attention from the groom's mother, readily nodded, lifting the plate. It was my chance. Under the pretense of taking a photo, I leaned in, not towards the cake, but towards the slice. My eyes, trained for minutia, confirmed what I feared. The shiny particle was small, but unmistakable. It looked like a shard of glass or metal with a sharp, intentionally broken tip. My heart hammered in my chest. "Perfect!" I exclaimed, straightening up. "Now, before you take this masterpiece, I'd like to taste a tiny bit. It's a family tradition. The groom's mother always tastes the first piece to ensure sweetness brings luck to the couple." I knew I was improvising, but the urgency was palpable. The waiter, a little confused but polite, offered me a small fork. I took the fork, but instead of tasting, with a quick and almost imperceptible movement, I used the tip to scrape off the suspicious particle, hiding it in the palm of my hand. "Delicious," I lied, returning the fork. "Now please take this slice to the newlyweds. They'll love it." The waiter walked away, and I felt the tiny, cold object in my hand, a silent testament to a danger no one else seemed to notice. With the tiny, cold object hidden in the palm of my hand, a shiver ran down my body, much more intense than the ballroom's air conditioning. The waiter, oblivious to my maneuver, continued on his way to the newlyweds' table, carrying the slice of cake that, for a moment, represented imminent danger. I needed to get out of there. to find a place where I could examine what I had collected without raising suspicion. With a forced smile and a nod to some guests who greeted me, I discreetly headed for the restroom area, which was in a more secluded corridor away from the main hustle and bustle. Every step was torture, my heart pounding erratically as if it wanted to leap from my chest. The music, once soft, now seemed like a distant drum, muffling the sound of my own thoughts. Upon entering the ladies' room, which fortunately was empty, I locked the door and approached the sink. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I opened my palm to reveal the small fragment. Under the cold mirror light, the object gleamed with a sinister intensity. There was no doubt it wasn't sugar, nor a piece of decoration. It was a shard of glass, small, sharp, translucent, with a tip that seemed to have been intentionally broken. The panic I had contained exploded within me. My breathing became ragged, and I had to lean on the sink to keep from falling. Someone had put glass in my son's wedding cake. The gravity of the situation hit me with full force. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate attempt to cause harm, perhaps even something worse. My mind raced, trying to process the information. Who would do such a thing, and why? Michael and Sarah were beloved people with no apparent enemies. Or was I mistaken? Michael's face, radiant with happiness just minutes ago, flashed in my mind, and a wave of protective fury washed over me. I would not allow anything bad to happen to my son or his new wife. But how? How could I expose this without causing irreparable scandal on the most important day of their lives? The idea of interrupting the party, of shouting about glass in the cake, was unthinkable. It would destroy the wedding, tarnish the memory of this day forever. But what would be worse, a scandal or the possibility of someone being seriously injured? The scales of my conscience weighed heavily. I had to be smart, strategic. I had to find out who was responsible and neutralize the threat without Michael and Sarah having their day ruined. I carefully wrapped the glass shard in a small tissue and placed it in the inner pocket of my dress, feeling the weight of that evidence on my chest. The party outside continued, and I, the groom's mother, now carried a dark secret that could explode at any moment. With the glass shard safe, but heavy in my pocket, I returned to the ballroom, trying to compose my expression to something resembling joy. My eyes, however, scanned the environment with a new intensity, looking for something or someone out of place. I needed more information. Who had access to the cake? Who could have a motive? My mind, trained for detail analysis, began to assemble an invisible puzzle. I remembered the preparations, the countless meetings with the wedding planner, Mrs. Albright, an impeccable and efficient woman, but with an air of superiority that always bothered me. And also the pastry chef, Madame Dubois, a French artist with a strong temperament, but who seemed to love her work. I decided to start with the kitchen, the epicenter of any party. Under the pretext of checking if everything was going well with dinner, I headed for the service door. The smell of fresh food and the clatter of pans greeted me. There, among the team of waiters and cooks, I saw Mrs. Albright, clipboard in hand, giving orders in her sharp voice. "Mrs. Albright," I called, trying to sound casual. "The party is wonderful. Congratulations. The cake? Well, a work of art. Who was responsible for bringing it and setting it up?" She looked at me over her glasses, a slight air of impatience on her face. "Ah, Mrs. Emma, the cake was delivered by Madame Dubois' team this morning. My team merely supervised the setup and transport to the ballroom, all according to plan, of course." Her answer was professional, but something in her tone, a certain rigidity, made me question. "And Madame Dubois, did she come herself?" I asked, observing her reaction. "No, Mrs. Emma. She rarely comes personally. Her assistants are perfectly capable. Why do you ask?" Mrs. Albright stared at me, and I felt I was treading on dangerous ground. "Mother's curiosity, wanting to make sure everything is perfect for my Michael," I replied with a forced smile. She nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on me for a moment longer than necessary. I left the kitchen with more questions than answers. If Madame Dubois wasn't there, who else had access to the cake? And why did Mrs. Albright seem so defensive? My intuition, the same one that guided me for so many years, began to whisper a name I was reluctant to accept. Mrs. Albright, with her calculated perfection, her control over every detail. Could it be possible? The idea was absurd, but the glass shard in my pocket was real. The tension in the ballroom air, which I had previously attributed to my motherly anxiety, now seemed to have a darker origin. I was alone in this, and with each passing minute, the danger seemed to draw closer. The suspicion about Mrs. Albright, however unfounded it seemed, began to take root in my mind. Her controlling demeanor, the way she seemed to want to manage every aspect of the wedding, including my presence, now took on a new and disturbing meaning. I knew I needed more than intuition. I needed confirmation, or at least something that would help me rule her out. I decided to approach her again, but this time with a different strategy, focusing on details that might reveal something about her knowledge or involvement with the cake. I found her near the gift table, arranging cards with almost robotic precision. "Mrs. Albright," I began, in a tone I hoped was friendly and unassuming. "I was just thinking about the cake. It's truly magnificent, but something occurred to me, the golden details. They're so delicate. Were there no issues with transport or setup? You know, with so many guests and all the movement, an accident could easily happen." I watched her closely, looking for any sign of nervousness or hesitation. She stopped what she was doing and looked at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Emma, Madame Dubois' team is extremely professional. The cake was transported under ideal conditions, and the setup was done with the utmost care. There were no incidents, I assure you." Her response was quick, perhaps too quick. And the smile, oh, the smile. It was polished, but there was a coldness behind it that sent shivers down my spine. "I see," I replied, maintaining my own smile. "It's just, with so many small details, sometimes a sprinkle can come loose or a little piece of something. It's good to know everything is under control." Mrs. Albright cleared her throat, and for a brief moment, her eyes darted to the cake table, which was now being served to guests. "Everything is perfectly under control, Mrs. Emma. My job is to ensure perfection, and that's what I will do." There was a subtle emphasis on the word perfection that felt almost like a veiled threat. She wasn't just stating, she was declaring. The conversation ended, and I walked away, a knot in my stomach. Mrs. Albright hadn't convinced me. On the contrary, her rigidity and the way she avoided my eyes when I mentioned a little piece of something only heightened my suspicions. She seemed to be hiding something or protecting someone. But who? And why would she do that? The image of Michael and Sarah, happy, dancing in the center of the ballroom, contrasted sharply with the darkness I felt growing inside me. I was at a wedding, my son's wedding, and I felt like a detective in a suspense film. The glass shard in my pocket seemed to burn my skin, a constant reminder of the danger hanging over everyone. I needed to act, and fast, before the next slice of cake reached an innocent person. Sarah's revelation about Madame Dubois personally delivering the cake and her insistence on not letting anyone near it echoed in my mind. Mrs. Albright, with her rigidity, was either just following the pastry chef's instructions or perhaps trying to cover up something Madame Dubois herself had done. The image of the pastry chef, with her air of a temperamental artist, now took on sinister contours. I needed a moment alone with her, away from the curious eyes of the guests. I found Madame Dubois in the kitchen, overseeing the dessert being prepared. She was wearing a frosting-stained apron, her hair in a messy bun, and a look of tiredness, but also satisfaction on her face. "Madame Dubois," I called, my voice sounding firmer than I expected. She turned, a professional smile on her lips. "Ah, Mrs. Emma. The cake was a success, wasn't it? One of my best creations, if I may say so myself." I approached her, feeling the glass shard in my pocket. "It was indeed Madame Dubois, but there's a small detail that puzzles me." I extended my hand, revealing the tiny fragment of glass I had kept. "This here, I found it in the cake. Could you explain what it is?" Her smile vanished instantly. Her eyes, once full of pride, widened in shock, and for a brief moment I saw a flicker of terror. She tried to cover it up, but it was too late. That's impossible. My cakes are made with the utmost care, Mrs. Emma. It must be an accident, perhaps a piece of crystal from the decoration that came loose." Her voice was choked, and she began to stammer. "No, Madame Dubois," I interrupted her, my voice low but authoritative. "This is not a decorative crystal. It's glass, and the way it was inserted, it doesn't look like an accident." I stared at her, my eyes fixed on hers. Who would do such a thing, and why? She lowered her head, and a heavy sigh escaped her lips. I didn't mean to. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Her voice was almost a whisper. Didn't mean to what, Madame Dubois? Didn't mean for someone to get hurt? Or didn't mean to get caught? The tension in the kitchen was palpable. The cooks and waiters, who had been working noisily, now watched in silence, sensing the gravity of the situation. It was Sarah, she finally confessed, her voice broken. She asked me to do it. She said she wanted revenge on Michael for something he did in the past. She said she wanted him to swallow what he put her through. She promised me a fortune, Mrs. Emma, a fortune for my business, which was struggling. I was desperate. My mind reeled. Sarah, the bride, the woman Michael loved, that was unthinkable. A poisoning plot orchestrated by the bride herself? The pain and betrayal Michael would feel would be immeasurable. What kind of revenge, Madame Dubois? What did Michael do to deserve this? I demanded, my heart aching. She didn't tell me the details, Mrs. Emma, only that he publicly humiliated her, that he made her feel small and insignificant, and that she wanted him to feel the same pain, but in a way he would never expect. Madame Dubois' confession hit me like a punch to the gut. The sweetness of the wedding turned to bitterness, the joy into a cruel farce. I had the proof, I had the confession. But how could I expose this without completely destroying Michael's life? What would be worse, public humiliation or silent danger? The decision was mine, and its weight was almost unbearable. Madame Dubois' confession left me in shock. Sarah, the bride, the woman Michael had chosen to spend the rest of his life with, was the mastermind behind that cruel plot. The pain I felt for Michael was overwhelming. He, so naive, so in love, was about to marry a woman who planned his humiliation and possibly his physical suffering. I had to act, but I couldn't destroy Michael's reputation, nor the memory of what should have been the happiest day of his life. Sarah's revenge would be silent, but my justice would be too. Madame Dubois, I said, my voice now cold and calculating, you will give me every detail about Sarah's plan, every conversation, every instruction, every promise, and you will do exactly as I say. She, scared and remorseful, readily nodded. Yes, Mrs. Emma, anything. I instructed Madame Dubois to prepare a slice of cake identical to the one I had intercepted, but without the glass. This slice would be served to Michael and Sarah. Meanwhile, I approached Mrs. Albright, asking to speak with her privately. Mrs. Albright, I need your help. There's a serious problem with the cake, and I need it removed discreetly without anyone noticing. I explained to her in vague terms that there was contamination and that the guest's health was at risk. Mrs. Albright, shocked by the seriousness of my voice, agreed to act. As Mrs. Albright and her team removed the main cake, replacing it with a backup cake that Madame Dubois had brought, a standard precaution for large weddings, I approached Michael and Sarah. Michael, Sarah, darlings, I said, with a forced smile, there's a little surprise. Madame Dubois has prepared a special slice for you as a wedding gift. She wants you to taste it together to seal your union. Michael, radiant, picked up the fork. Sarah, however, hesitated for a moment, a glint of nervousness in her eyes. She looked at me, and I stared back with a look that said, I know. She picked up the fork, but her hands trembled slightly. They tasted the cake, and I watched Sarah's expression. There was relief, but also a latent fear. She knew that I knew. The party continued, but for Sarah, joy had turned into a prison of anxiety. She avoided me for the rest of the night, her eyes discreetly following me. Michael, oblivious to everything, was happy, and that was my victory. Justice didn't have to be public to be effective. In the days that followed, Madame Dubois, following my instructions, privately revealed Sarah's plot to Michael, presenting the evidence I had helped collect. Michael, devastated, confronted Sarah. The marriage was annulled in less than a week, and Sarah, without the financial support she expected and with her reputation tarnished in Charleston's social circles, disappeared. Madame Dubois, in exchange for her cooperation and genuine remorse, received my help to rebuild her business, but on the condition of never again getting involved in such schemes. Michael, though wounded by the betrayal, thanked me for saving his life and his dignity. He learned a valuable lesson about trust and character, and our relationship as mother and son grew even stronger. That glass shard, which once represented a threat, became a symbol of my vigilance and a mother's unconditional love. Sometimes justice is served in silence, and the hardest lessons are learned in darkness. If you believe a mother's love can overcome any obstacle and unravel the darkest plots, leave your comment, share this story, and subscribe to the channel for more narratives that reveal the strength of the human spirit.